Let's welcome Drew Houston.
All right, can you guys hear me okay? Good. So it's really a pleasure to be here, and surreal for me in a couple of different ways, but a big turning point on kind of my whole entrepreneurial adventure was actually about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. There's this thing called Startup School, which is held in an auditorium not too far from here. So it's been a pretty crazy journey since then that I hope to tell you guys a little bit about. And so what I want to talk about is, first and foremost, a little bit of the Dropbox story, especially the early days and how we got started. And maybe thread through there some of the lessons we can draw from that. And you know, when I was embarking on this journey, it was actually, you know, I graduated with my undergrad degree in computer science about 6 years ago. So it hasn't been that long, but it would have been awesome if like someone sat me down and told me what the journey would be like. So I'm trying to think of this in kind of those terms. What do I wish someone had told me when I was, you know, 21, 22, just getting started? Because it was a pretty kind of, you know, what I was thinking about the whole startup world was kind of like climbing Mount Doom, right? You don't know how tall it is, but there's a lot of fire and things exploding all around you, and a lot of smoke, and it's really steep. And you know, even if you know where you're going right now, things are going to get gnarly down the road. So if I can do anything to kind of demystify some of the process too, I hope I can do that. So thanks again. A little bit about me. So I grew up as a little kid. I was programming computers, studied computer science at MIT. I've learned not to fight those kinds of battles, or at least it's the Stanford of the East, I guess you could call it. And that was really kind of the beginning. And one thing I realized there was I'd been programming for a while, so I actually felt I had a pretty good handle on the building part of things. But then I was really fascinated by the world of business too. And throughout high school and college, I had worked at a bunch of different startups. And more than anything else, working at a startup was the most kind of informative experience for me, or the thing that prepared me best for this kind of whole journey. And that was a little counterintuitive because, you know, especially if you go to, you know, competitive school, you grow up, and you know, life is all about checking these boxes, right? First, you gotta get the right test scores, you gotta get the right GPA, you gotta do these different things to kind of be prepared and sort of be good enough to be admitted into a good school. And so if you kind of carry that logic forward, you imagine that the right path to startups would be something like, well, you know, what got me here was checking off these boxes, and I can think of all kinds of other boxes that I should check off before I'm like really ready to start a company. You know, among them, maybe I should get a bunch of, you know, graduate degrees, so I'm a really good engineer. Maybe I should go get an MBA so I know about business. Maybe I should work at a big company, or like a big tech company like Google. Then maybe I should work at a medium company, and then a small company, and then, you know, sometime in my 30s, 40s, 50s, I'll be prepared to start a company. And empirically, you know, there is no, I mean, one thing about this whole world is there's a bunch of different paths to success, but empirically, it's sort of surprising that so many of the companies kind of you'd think about in the Hall of Fame were started by people who were basically had no idea what the hell they were doing either. And so if you have that feeling, you know, it should be of some comfort that, you know, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, all these things were started by, you know, first or second time entrepreneurs who were really figuring it out along the way too. And so don't be too daunted if you don't have all the answers. But one important part of the Dropbox story began when one of my best friends, this guy named Adam Smith, he started a company called Zobni, and he got funding from this group of people called Y Combinator. And back then they were still doing it in Boston as well as out here. And I was literally camped out in his living room while he was working on his company. And I had been working on a company, I had bootstrapped, of all things, an SAT prep company starting sometime in 2004. And, you know, like most first efforts, you know, I had no idea what I was doing. In retrospect, we did all kinds of things wrong. But the biggest thing that was illuminating was so what happened with Adam was he got a little bit of funding at the beginning of the summer, and at the end of the summer, he moved out here. He moved up to the city, to San Francisco, and suddenly he was talking to like all these people, all these billionaires and famous entrepreneurs that I'd only read about. And the next thing I know, I get this phone call from him being like, "Hey, we just got like $5 million from Vinod Khosla." And I was like, oh my God. And Adam and I were fraternity brothers at MIT, and he was actually my little brother. And so kind of a stark contrast between, not less than a year prior, probably my best memories with Adam were, in our game room at our fraternity playing beer pong, not exactly expecting to be wheelbarrowing away millions of dollars in cash. So I was like, well, all right, if Adam can do it, I can too. And so never underestimate some of the baser motivations and how they can propel you forward, or maybe as a more practical piece of advice. There's some quote that you're an average of your 5 closest friends. So it can really help to be in a place where your closest friends are also interested in startups, and you're all kind of pushing each other forward in a good-natured way, but there's also an undercurrent of competition that can really be helpful. So I saw the experience that Adam went through with Zobni and Y Combinator. I was having sort of this, it helped me discover that I was kind of having this crisis where I couldn't put a name to it, but it was something like burnout, where I'd been working on my SAT prep company for 2 or 3 years part-time, and while I was finishing up my degree. And I was like, I haven't even asked myself, in the best case scenario, what happens? And I'm sort of thinking, I'm like, well, best case scenario is I'm kind of like king of SAT prep, and I kind of imagine like a little cardboard like Burger King crown or something. But I'm like, I'm not even really that excited about that, because there's not really, I love standardized testing as much as any hormonally balanced person can. But I'm like, this is probably not my calling. So, and so I was like, well, okay, I've spent so much time on this thing. I should really think carefully about what I do next. And I was like, okay, it should really come down to a few things. And one of them was it had to be something that was deeply technical, because at heart, since I was little, technology is what I really love. And I would love for whatever company I start to have technology as kind of the core source of its competitive advantage. 2 is I wanted something that I could explain to normal people, in a bar or a coffee shop or something, and have them vaguely know what I'm talking about. And so there are lots of interesting ideas that, some elements of infrastructure or software or enterprise software that kind of ruled that out, even though it's technically interesting. And third was, it had to be something that had a working business model, because actually this was kind of the height of Web 2.0. It was all kind of back to eyeballs and these different things, but I didn't really understand how that works if you can eventually get people to pay for your stuff, or at least 4 people or however many were in here. So it was a good exercise for me, because then I was able to think long and hard about what I did next. And I found myself in this really bizarre situation where the same way that social or mobile or local startups are kind of the fad right now. In late 2006, early 2007, cloud storage or online storage startups were kind of the thing that is like the startup cliche, basically. And so on TechCrunch, you'd have these roundups of okay, here are the next 100 online storage companies that have launched, and it was just kind of a joke. And but at the same time, I had all these problems with this, because I had this company, and all of our crown jewels I had on this little thumb drive, and I was always one stupid mistake away from disaster, right? I would carry it in my shorts, and I'd pull it out, and the connector would be bent, and I'd pray that I could bend it back softly but firmly enough so that it would keep working, And I would, just all the things that people would do. I would still be emailing myself stuff. I'd still be carrying this thing around, my little leash, and it just drove me nuts. And I went through Michael Arrington's articles, and I tried all 100 of the things, and I found something interesting where none of them really solved the problem for me, even though there were a lot of them. And And in particular, you had to get like one thing to, one service that was like a website you could upload your stuff to, and then you had to get another app that was like, that would sync things across your computers, and then you get another app to back up your computer. And I'm like, as we would later tell investors, I'm like, I mean, I can't really imagine Tom Cruise in Minority Report like logging into his Gmail to like pick up the attachment he sent himself that morning, or like forgetting his thumb drive. Right? He's just up over here, and just your stuff follows you around, and that's the whole point. Like someone else takes care of it. And we had a glimpse of that at school, and I'm sure you guys have something similar. We have this system called Athena, where you sit down at any of tens of thousands of computers across campus. All your stuff's in front of you. You don't think about it, and it's not a very it's not a consumer kind of typical environment. It's very kind of Unix focused and things like that. But still, you're not like sprinting back across campus to pick up your paper. You're not worried about backing it up because again, someone else is just taking care of it. And nobody had really built that for the rest of the world. And this was pre iPhone and iPad and all the amazing things that have happened in the last 5 years. And it wasn't actually a very mainstream use case. I mean, people were not syncing things across like 6 Linux PCs. Even then, most people just had one computer. But anyway, this drove me nuts enough where the kind of last straw was I was in Boston South Station at the Chinatown bus terminal. And if any of you have had the pleasure of riding the Chinatown bus, it costs like 10 or 15 bucks, and it takes you from Boston to New York, and is famous for such things as like tipping over or things like that. So fortunately, that wasn't part of the story. And I got to New York okay, but there was a problem, which is I had been making this mental checklist of like all these great things that I was going to get done, because I had 4 hours in front of me where nobody was going to bother me, and here are all the great things I was going to accomplish. And I excitedly sit down and I open up my, I guess, ThinkPad at the time, and I'm like, I get that feeling in the pit of my stomach, which I'm sure many of you have experienced at one time or another, where it's like, start feeling around in my pockets, and I just get this vivid picture in my head of my thumb drive sitting on my desk at home. And I'm like, shit. And then I'm like, okay, instead of getting all these wonderful things done, now I'm just going to think about what an idiot I am for the next 4 hours. But sulked for 10 or 15 minutes, but then actually opened up the editor and started writing some code, having absolutely no idea what this turned into. But I'm like, I was so frustrated that nobody had really solved this problem. And so that was the kind of the beginning of it. And then through a kind of an interesting chain of events, I met my co-founder, Arash. I actually put up a screencast of Dropbox on Hacker News, and Arash actually saw it, and it turned out one of the other things I did on this trip out to California 5 years ago, back in March 2007, was come out to meet a bunch of the Y Combinator founders and complain how I didn't have a co-founder. And it turned out I met someone who was a mutual friend of mine and Arash's, and he made an introduction to us. And we met up at the MIT Student Center and hung out for an hour or two and talked about MySQL and some other things and Dropbox. And they were like, yeah, of course we'll like spend all of our waking hours together for the foreseeable future. So kind of like getting married on the first date. But if anything, there was just an extraordinarily lucky break that it ended up working out, and we ended up having all these complementary skills and a great relationship. But I would recommend getting to know, that's not the safe way to do it, and that's the one probably most important decision you make, is who your co-founder is. But anyway, so Arash and I apply to Y Combinator, and we get in, and we spend this blissful summer of doing nothing but waking up, writing code till the sun goes down, then it comes up again, and then I would drive back and drop him off at his dorm at MIT, and I'd race home, and we'd do it again, probably for 90 days straight. And so one of the great things about Y Combinator is it kind of plugs you in. It's sort of a startup boot camp where you encounter all these cast of characters that you meet out here, where you hear talks. There's all the program is really these weekly dinners, and you have talks from entrepreneurs and lawyers, investors, just all these different people, and they kind of start giving you context around what you need to know. And one of the most challenging things as a founder is really you discover very quickly that you know a lot about or a technical founder, is you know a lot about the engineering, but there's all these other things you suddenly have to care about, from sales to finance to management, strategy, like all these different things. And one of the things I had done that was really valuable in college is during the summers, I would go up onto the roof of our house and I'd just go on Amazon and I'd like search for like sales and I'd look for like the highest rated book on that and like buy it and do the same thing for all of those different disciplines. And it actually was absolutely instrumental in helping me start to understand how all these things worked. And you don't become a great salesperson by reading a book any more than you become a great like guitarist or basketball player by reading a book. But it can start to give you some sense of, for people that are really great at this, what do they think about? And there's a really kind of important kind of 80-20 aspect of sort of just learning the basics about a given discipline. That was really helpful for me. But anyway, so Y Combinator, this is this amazing experience, and we moved out of Boston to San Francisco. And just to give you a kind of flavor of the kinds of things that you have to deal with when you're sort of trying to figure all this out, is through another series of events, we got introduced to this venture firm called Sequoia Capital. And it's the kind of thing where, that you walk into the chalets and, a couple miles away from here, and for someone who never really spent much time in California or never spent much time in the whole ecosystem, it's pretty daunting because you look and it's like, okay, there's like a picture of, Steve Jobs, and there's the original Google S1 or the stock certificates from the IPO, and you're just like, I don't really belong here. I'm just like we're just a couple of, Arash actually dropped out of school, so he gets all the startup cred. But anyway, so, but anyway, there we are, and we actually hit it off with the partner there, and then through, sort of muddle our way through, and I'm desperately calling people at night asking for advice on fundraising, different things, through people I'd met. And somehow we found ourselves in a situation where they decided to invest. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And we were going through all the process, and it happened pretty quickly. We showed up on a Friday. We had a handshake deal on Monday night, so one business day turnaround, which was pretty convenient. And then I had this new problem, which was their finance people are emailing me like, okay, please send me your wiring instructions. I'm like, wiring instructions? I'm like, the only training I have in wiring instructions is I think that happened in like James Bond movies. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure we only have like the My First Business checking account from Bank of America that we set up in the Cambridge Side Galleria Mall. And I'm like, so this might be tough. So Arash and I go to the North Beach branch of the Bank of America, and we're like, all right, well, so you got the teller people, and you got the leather seat people, and we look at each other, we're like, this is probably a leather seat problem. And we sit down, and the woman was really nice. She's like, oh, how can I help you? And I'm like, is there a limit to how much a bank account can hold? And she's like, well, what do you mean? And like, I was dressed in shorts and a hoodie, and Arash was even more disheveled. And I'm like, well, can it hold $1 million? And she's like, yeah. And so, and I don't know if she thought I was like drugs or this kind of thing happens all the time out here, but both sides very quickly stopped asking questions, and we got our routing number and everything, and went back. But there's no like startup manual where you're like, okay, well, here's how that works, and so a lot of it is really, even when you look at some of these amazingly successful companies, and having had a chance to meet a lot of those people, so much of what makes startups great is really just kind of this iterative process of just having these random things happen to you, or having these ideas and just kind of figuring it out. And I talk about some of the kind of more humble beginnings, because I think there's this huge disservice that kind of of sort of Silicon Valley mythology and the things you read in magazines, where it's like, went from the moment he was sitting in his dorm room at Harvard, Mark Zuckerberg sought to redefine the face of human communication. And Google, they were going to organize all the world's information and all these different things, and you sort of sit there and you're like, you're just trying to like write code and hope it compiles. And you're like, well, I know I'm not quite like that. I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about like we have $60 left in our checking account, and I can't loan the company any more money. So anyway, the point is, like, in fact, Facebook, it was number like project number 7 or 8 that Mark happened to be hacking on, and it just happened to sign up, the whole like Harvard campus in a couple of weeks. But Google, like they were rejected when they wanted to sell the company for $1 million to Yahoo. And so the point is, all these things start with much more modest ambitions, and even sort of the great entrepreneurs. And the goal, as you sort of reach each of these new milestones, you're like, okay, the goalposts move back, and so your ambitions become much broader over time. And this is kind of, all this doesn't happen overnight. So when you kind of look at, I talked at the beginning of how kind of daunting everything seemed, because there's like, the little sort of corner of stuff that and this world of stuff that you don't. Often that can be enough of a barrier to stop people from even getting started. So just realize that you have to be systematic about how you learn all these things, but this all happens one day at a time. And so then there were a couple other things that were pretty instrumental in in the early years of Dropbox. And one of them was really figuring out distribution. And I think that's something that people kind of underestimate the importance of that. And it was especially interesting in our case because we made a couple of mistakes. One was like, we're like, all right, well, we're launching this company, and we should probably get real and like hire PR people and advertise and do all these different things and SEO and buy AdWords and all this stuff. And so we bought a lot of AdWords. We spent a bunch of money and time on this, and the results were just terrible. It cost us like $500 or $1,000 to acquire a user that was going to pay us $100, and so very clear that wasn't going to work. But we had actually done these more kind of guerrilla things, which was inspired by reading the book Guerrilla Marketing, which was actually really instrumental in thinking about this, where we put this video of Dropbox on Dig in 2007, or March 2008, about a year after we started. And what we managed to do is we put all these little Easter eggs in it. And and if you're familiar with Dig or Reddit, they're kind of these classic internet communities, and they have these little memes and things like that. And it was just this deadpan demo of me talking over sort of a screen. But the files were all named things, named after like Chocolate Rain, which was like a YouTube sensation, or was it's like YouTube, one of these viral videos back in the day. And references to Office Space and Obama and XKCD and all these things. But it's just me kind of deadpan narrating, oh, this is how Dropbox works. And the thing just like, and we gave it kind of a little bit of a link bait title. I think it was Google Drive Killer coming from MIT startup. So go big. And so the thing just like absolutely took off. It hit the top of Dig. It was like 12,000 digs. Hundreds of thousands of people visited getdropbox.com, which is our first domain name. It's a whole other story. But anyway, all these people visited the website, and like our beta waiting list went from 5,000 to 75,000 people overnight, which is because we'd been wringing our hands about this kind of critical mass problem and how do we get started, and just that one kind of ghetto thing that we did like ended up working extremely well. In fact, it solved literally overnight our distribution problem, or at least getting started problem. And the lesson there is not to make a video and put it on Dig, because that probably wouldn't work very well anymore. But really understand. There were a couple of insights that came from that. One is just another thing I learned from one of these books called Crossing the Chasm is you have this technology adoption life cycle, and you have these people who. Most people are not searching the internet for like cool things that they can download onto their computer or like want more buttons on their Blu-ray remote, right? But there are some people who are like that. and they're called early adopters, and they kind of seek out technology for its own sake. And any service or any company has some kind of early adopters, whether it's fashion or cars or in our case, it's really technology and kind of this tool or this utility. And Dig was just happened to be the kind of place where those people hung out and where those people would really take to something like this, even though they couldn't download it yet. And so understanding our early customer was really valuable there. And that's one way that we did that. The other problem we discovered is that no one's really searching for what we're building. No one was like waking up in the middle of the night being like, oh my God, I wish I didn't have to like email myself stuff or like carry around a thumb drive. That's just like how your computer works. I mean, I wish I had a washing machine, like you put clothes in, press a button, they're clean, they come out, but like I'm not like waking up in the middle of the night being like, man, it really sucks that there's like this washer thing and there's a dryer and you have to like put one and wait and put it in the other. But that's just like how it works. And so from that angle, it's like, well, it doesn't matter how many, you can buy all the AdWords in the world, but if no one's searching for what you're making, then you have a problem. And so you have to find other ways of doing that. And so the thing that really worked for us was first make a product that people really love to use. And there's all kinds of things, elements that go into the craftsmanship and all these little thousands of details that we had to sand down and all these things that some of the other companies didn't really get quite right from an engineering standpoint. But then if you're able to do that, then Dropbox actually happened to fall in this category of a sort of unusual category where it solves a problem you don't even know you have. And it actually works. And unlike that Blu-ray player, when all you're trying to do is like watch Batman, and you can't even plug it into your TV, that's people's kind of average experience with technology. And so, one way to conceptualize what makes a good product is, good engineering is part of it, good design is part of it, but really it's, one way I think about it is maximizing the probability that someone shows up at the front door of, your store or your website or whatever it is and ends up with a solved problem. And that's why things like Craigslist, started in the 90s, doesn't appear to have been updated since the 90s, still by far the most successful, website or most successful business of its kind, because you show up at Craigslist.org and you leave with your concert tickets or your casual encounter or whatever you're looking for. Even though the design isn't that great, maybe it's not that hard of an engineering problem, different things. Just unbelievably successful. So anyway, it starts with a good, in my opinion, it really starts with a great product, and all the marketing or tricks in the world. It's you're not going to push a rock uphill. And then the second thing, so once we understood that, then it made it a lot easier for us to conceptualize this. And so what we did instead, we're like, okay, well, we have all these people who appear to really love Dropbox. And the only reason we're like succeeding at all, besides this sort of dig maneuver we did in the beginning, is because they're telling their friends about it. And so why don't we just like harness that? And how can we give people tools to spread the word? And so what we did was two things that drive the vast majority of all of our traffic today, or all of our signups, which are, one, we made this incentive referral program where if I tell you about Dropbox, you get some extra space and I get some extra space. And we had this kind of currency to work with. And people were just doing that kind of for its own sake, where people weren't even using the extra space. They were just referring their friends because they're like, it's like points, right? It's this whole, what we'd now call kind of a gamification mechanic, even though we didn't, I don't know if that word had been around back then, but that's what it happened to be. And then the other thing was we created this idea of shared folders where, if I'm working on a project at work or I want to share these photos with my family, then all these users, or just by using the product, you get brought into the fold. And there's this whole, now there's this whole body of art and science on how to do that and how consumer internet companies grow and how viral growth works. But anyway, these things were instrumental to how we got started. And so there's all kinds of things I could say about sort of the intervening years, and this sort of like one of the frustrating things about giving a talk that's like a half hour is like you have to omit. It's like the montage where Rocky's punching or whatever, and suddenly like I don't know, but then obviously, but making a good product, finding ways to get distribution, and then the last thing I'll really touch on is because I had the chance to ask Mike Moritz, like, what really separates the great companies from all the companies that are out there in technology? And he's like, one is, he said, hiring the best engineers, and two, the founders having a morbid fascination with the product. And I'm not even going to try to do the whole Welsh accent thing, but those two things, will carry you a long way. And then I'm sure he would add having a really big market and all the other things that matter in a business. But probably the most amazing thing for me is when it works out. And the thing that attracted me to this in the first place was really kind of never like having a high learning curve. So that part's taken care of. It's always, you're never bored. There's never things or never shortage of things to worry about or that are new. But what's really exciting is now, we have this from the starting point, we have the canvas we're painting on as we've gone from millions of users a couple of years ago to tens of millions of users. Soon we have a very clear path to hundreds of millions of users. Of all the people that have thought about kind of like building, the internet file system or this fabric that kind of connects all the world's devices and services and apps, we're actually the ones who get to build it. And when you think about someone who builds things and who studies computer science, you're probably not going to go to the Super Bowl, probably not going to be in Hollywood in movies. But so for this really is a Super Bowl. And when it works out, and you actually sit down, you look over someone's shoulder at a Starbucks and see a little blue box, or you add up, this many, millions of people or tens of millions of people or hundreds of millions of people times saving them like 10 minutes or making their life like 1% better or whatever. Suddenly it's like, okay, this is like lifetimes of pain that we're saving people every day. And then, it's just, this is the most like amazing path to actually, if it all works out, actually changing the world. So I promised leave time for Q&A, so I guess we'll leave it at that.
How do you fend off competitors like now Google Drive and SkyDrive?
Yeah, the question is, how do you fend off competitors, especially when they're the largest internet companies in the world? We think about that from time to time. Another sort of bias is you always kind of overestimate competition. Not that it should be underestimated, but for companies like ours, and you think about any company that has gotten to there are plenty of stories of companies where, they got a really great head start, and then somehow things went south. With Netscape or MySpace, or there's a bunch of companies that you could say fall in this category. And when you talk to people in those companies, there's a very clear trend, which is that suicide is a much more common cause of death than homicide. Meaning, often, or companies are getting built faster than ever, like in the history of the world. And so, along with that kind of hypergrowth, there are all these different cancers that you can get. And so, things are going to go wrong. My favorite analogy on this was Mark Andreessen. He's like, okay, it's like trying to bake a cake in 5 minutes. Like, no matter how good you are, you can have egg on the ceiling, there's gonna be stuff on the walls. You just pray when you pull the cake out. Maybe it's a little bit lopsided. You can like squish it back. But like if you forget the eggs or you forget the sugar, you can't like sprinkle them on later. So, how do you figure out the stuff, or how do you figure out what stuff you can't fix later? And I'll come back to the competition thing in a second. Sorry for such a tangent. And so, often what happens at those companies that screw it up, if you talk to people inside them, they're like, well, we lost our focus, or we hired people that weren't as good, and then the talented people we got in the beginning looked around, and they're like, I'm tired of fixing this person's bugs, or that they don't work as hard, or all this stuff, and life is short, I'm a talented person, I want to go find the place that has a lot of talented people. So actually, The point about hiring the very best people is something we spend a ton of time on, because that's the thing you can't sprinkle on later. If you ever lose it, it's gone. And then the other is really distraction. Some pretty heartbreaking stories out there of companies that were really promising, but then either started trying to do too many things, or Friendster, the founder, complaining that his board was trying to get him to chase all these deals with MTV and all these like shiny objects, when he's like, guys, the site won't even load. It takes 10 seconds for the web page to show up. And so the power of focus focus is really powerful. And again, you try to figure out those elements as you sort of start from just coding to designing systems of code and algorithms to designing systems of people, figuring out the things that other companies have learned about that along the way. And so while it's something that's really important to keep track of, most of if you actually look at all the data points, it's really more often the problems begin at home, not because of some competition. So the way we'll respond to, or the way we are responding to competition is actually very little is changing. Nothing in our roadmap actually changed. Maybe there are a couple of things that got reordered, but we just focus on maximizing the number of happy Dropbox users and figuring out more problems that people don't even know they have, and solving them, right? So we're never gonna run out of examples of that, right? You look at your iPhone and you're like, wow, this has a whatever megapixel camera and it takes HD video, but then how do I see that on my Samsung TV? Or why is it that, oh my God, I just discovered that I left my iPhone in a cab and now all my newborn kids' pictures are gone forever. That's a problem you never had to worry about before. And so we think a lot about what kinds of problems that people don't even know they have, and think about solving them. And we think we're the only people that are really thinking about it this way. And so keeping our users happy and hiring the best people, those are the two main things. And you can screw up all kinds of other stuff if you get those two right.
How do you make good business decisions?
It's kind of a hard. It's a hard question to answer. I think so the question is, how do you make good business decisions? And it's kind of a hard question to provide a pithy answer. How do you play guitar well? There's a bunch of things that go in it. It's a good question, but I think it's really about prioritizing those things and thinking about just that. How do we get the best people into the company? How do we build a great product? How do we make our users really happy? And then, especially as a first-time CEO, how do you have to? It was really helpful to me to try to really research how all of these companies worked, especially on the way up. How did Google work? How did, and not just internet companies, but how did Intel work? How did companies in the 70s work? What was the kind of get as many lenses on these different things to view things from a sales lens, or a behavioral psychology lens, or a management lens, all these different things. And so bringing those different kinds of perspectives, giving yourself context around those things, and having a lot of tools to kind of deal with any business situation, I think, are one framework for making good decisions. And hiring great people into the company that can help you with that stuff.
Could you tell a little more about the investment process? The first time you got investment from Sequoia, was it a no-brainer? Did you take whatever they offered? Did you negotiate, or was it very simple?
It's complicated. There's a lot of stuff that's sort of one of these, kind of a classic kind of pitfall of thing that you can spend a ton of time worrying about. But I'm sure any venture capitalist, if you could be the worst negotiator in the world, but if you're like, God, we're just getting so much traffic, we just need money for servers, can you please, we have all these people who are using it, we just need some money, you're going to get some pretty good venture capital investment if that's the problem you actually have. And how do you do that? You get traction. And so there's a whole body of knowledge on that that's actually pretty well spelled out. Venturehacks.com is where I learned, and I think is probably the best site out there that goes over the nuts and bolts of venture investment and a bunch of other interesting stuff.
Fantastic service. First of all, I've been addicted to Dropbox for the last 2 years in grad school. Used it every day of my life, and it's been fantastic. But the question that leads up to that, my usage, is that I'm maxed out on my 5 GB. And I'm the kind of person who doesn't like to pay for services. that's the truth of the matter. That I do that for Netflix for $7.99, and that's pretty much it. And I try to feign the payment. So what I do is I tell my mom to join, my dad to join, who don't know anything about technology. You're not going to be using Dropbox anytime in the near future. So how do you make this happen? Because I'm kind of, for now, I'm actually using Amazon Drive, I'm using a little bit of Microsoft, and I'm using Dropbox. How do you get people to pay money and make money for your business? Because valuations are all right, but money needs to come in.
Question is, how do we actually convince people to pay for what we're making? And there's actually, even with Dropbox as it is, there's all kinds of ways that that you can use a service without actually paying for it. And then there are even things you can do around, using sort of putting this stuff on Amazon, this stuff on Google, this stuff on Dropbox, and so on. I mean, our fundamental value proposition is that, like, we keep all of your stuff in one place, and we do a better job of that than anybody else, and you're free to not have to worry about all this stuff. Like, is it going to work with my phone? Is it going to work with my computer? We support all these different platforms, and provide what we hope is a uniformly great experience. And a lot of people just want a solved problem, and rather than going to all that trouble of sort of partitioning your stuff across all these different places, that's actually the point of Dropbox, is to bring it all together, and they'd rather have that than $10 a month or $100 a year. So fortunately, that goes back to the technology adoption curve. Like, some people just have different proclivities for, like, paying for things or not, and so we just make sure that we're solving a problem that's big enough for people that would rather pay for it than just then have to, like, deal with all these other hurdles.
Do you see enough people paying for that?
Yes, the paid services are popular, and I make everybody else be quiet about that, so I have to too. But
can you tell us about a few of the things that crossed your path that you guys decided not to go with, the things that seemed like good ideas, but then you subsequently discarded them?
So the question is, are there things that seemed like a promising path that we decided not to do? There are all kinds of great. I mean, that is almost the essence of what makes the job difficult. Is there's these thousands of things that we could go do, and all these shiny objects, and usually most of the things that we look back on and like that was a dead end. A lot of them we tried to get Dropbox sort of pre-installed on PCs and all these different things and do deals very early on. And the problem was a sort of classic negotiation. We had no leverage, so they were just going to push us around. They made all these ridiculous demands, and we kind of, it's like harpooning this whale, and they're just like taking you all over the place. And now it's a completely different story. We have a big audience and a brand and all these different things. But yeah, I'll give you an example. The number one thing our users, or more power users, ask for, which is the ability to watch multiple folders with your Dropbox. And they're like, why? You guys can see it on VoteBox, which is our our sort of way of that we let our users vote on different features that they want and make requests. Why the hell haven't you guys why don't you let me watch multiple folders? Because I want to watch my documents, I want to watch, map all these different things. And the reason is, well, the initial reason was like, we built something simple because we didn't have time to build something complicated. So it was more technically complicated. There's a lot of UI code. There's all this different stuff that I would have had to I would have gone and had to have built, and we just didn't have time to build it because we wanted to get something out the door. But then we realized there was this great benefit to the simplicity of the model, where your Dropbox will look the same on your phone as it does on your computer, and it's pretty easy to explain to people that you have this magic folder, and anything you save in here saves everywhere, and all these different benefits. And conversely, playing with the other products is sort of like, well, welcome to this, and please configure your folder mapping, and some people love that, and that's great. But most people are very, very confused, and if you're already, if you're already skeptical enough that here's this like new thing that you've never seen before, and now they're asking you about folder mappings, and you don't spend your time worrying about folders and files and things like that, then you're going to be pretty turned off. And we would find when we did usability tests that people couldn't even figure out how to install Dropbox to begin with. Like they would, we brought 5 people in literally off the street, and 0 of 5. We kept tally of all these things. 0 of 5 people even discovered that there was a tray icon or a little menu bar icon. And if you don't know that, then you're going to have a lot of trouble getting back to your Dropbox folder and all kinds of other things. You're not going to have a good experience. And we're like, wow, okay, 0%. All right. Because we get these emails. We get these emails to feedback to our feedback alias, and one would be like, oh my God, Dropbox is amazing, I love it. And the next one would be like, I don't understand how you MIT nerds have, I need a PhD in physics to even understand this thing. And they're just like this diatribe. And they're like one right after the other. And we're like, that's interesting. And so we brought people in off the street, and then we started seeing all these things. And like, okay, there's the people are clicking the screenshots in the tour because they think it's their computer. People, well, you laugh, but it's actually our problem, right? We got this. These are people that, that would be paying us if they actually had a good experience. And all kinds of things. They would click on Internet Explorer and it would obscure the download window, so or they couldn't figure out where the download actually went. I mean, we list of dozens and dozens and dozens of things, and we just sanded them down. We're just like, okay, well, we're going to get to thing number 71 today, and now if you actually install Dropbox, you see this big bouncing green arrow whenever where there's like, hey, this is the icon you have to click on to get to your Dropbox. And so, kind of long answer to, it's amazing. Even just like 10% more friction might cut your audience in half. And it's exponential. So we decided that it was not worth the complexity to build that, and just wasn't worth the engineering trade-off. In the back. Yeah?
I have a startup and we use Dropbox every day, and I don't know if this is a preference or not, but why did you go with an interface where if you remove the file, you're not removing a copy? That drives us crazy.
Yeah.
Is that a preference?
So the question is, why is it when someone moves something from a shared folder, it moves and doesn't copy? And unfortunately, that's just we only have so much control over the underlying operating system or the Finder or Explorer on Windows, and that's just the way those things were designed. And sort of the extra magic that gets sprinkled on that Dropbox does, it just isn't aware of it. And so there's probably some kinds of hacks that we could do to, like, if you move something out of a shared folder, warn you about it, or maybe do different schemes to make things read-only or things like that. But yeah, we're aware it's a problem, and that we should do something to make it better. It's just a limitation or it's just a constraint where we don't actually make the underlying operating system, so we can only have so much control over certain aspects of how it behaves. Guy, dark blue shirt, sitting.
So you get really lucky finding a co-founder. What advice would you have for other people trying to find co-founders? So what particular skills do you value, like looking back?
So the question is, what do you look for in a co-founder? And I think first and foremost, it has to be someone where you just really, really respect their judgment, and just sort of have absolute faith and trust in them as a person. Doesn't mean it doesn't mean that they'll be good at everything. In fact, it's actually good if there's some complementarity, and that there's some. There'll be things that you're both interested in. In mine and Raj's cases, we're both very passionate about the technology and the product design, and are very opinionated about those things. Unfortunately, our tastes are pretty similar on that front. But then there's stuff where it completely diverges. Like, I find the whole business side of the house absolutely fascinating. I think a lot about the broader strategy of how do we end up. We have the potential to be this really great company, but how do we actually get there, given all the sort of the minefield in the way. And he does not care. He is not at all interested in any of that stuff. And he is happiest when he's shaking an Android phone and discovering that when you long hold it like this and then rotate it and then shake it, there's some bug, and he'll be responding to questions in the forums on his deathbed. And while while I'm capable of doing that, and I think it's important for everybody to do some element of that. I can focus on other areas, but I know that he's got that under control. And so I think, it's really you and your co-founder, it's like you can't even really. I mean, you could have some kind of horrible situation where like someone gets kicked out or these different things, but they say you can't divorce your investors, and in most cases you can't really divorce your co-founder without pretty horrible things happening. But more important than that is really, you and your co-founder are kind of the seed crystal for the early team that's going to assemble around you, and then the first 10 people. Those first 10 people are going to be the seed crystal for, the next 100, and it keeps going out from there. And in general, talented people are not going to like join people that are like less talented, but there's often a lot of pressure, or you can sort of let the hiring bar go, where you're like, well, we really need someone to solve this problem, and it's really hurting us that no one is like building this thing. And so is it really that big a deal that this engineer kind of bombed that question, or like isn't really that excited about Dropbox, or isn't really going to work that hard? You have to say no. And so it's really just kind of finding someone that matches you in that way. How you do that is it's like how do you find, a spouse? It's like this. You'll spend more time with your co-founder than your spouse. In the back.
Yeah, me?
Yeah.
How do you react to somebody telling you that it's just a feature and not a company?
Question is, how do you respond to someone telling you that what you're making is a feature, not a product? So Steve Jobs was giving us a little bit of a hard time, saying that we were a feature and not a product when we didn't want to sell a company. And so, I mean, everybody's got opinions. This question.
You mentioned that hiring great people is a very valuable aspect of your company, but how do you spot good people?
So the question is, hiring great people is an important aspect of building a great company, but how do you spot great people? It's actually a really good question, because some of these things are more intuitive than other things, because for an engineer, a good engineer can generally recognize another good engineer, because you can sort of analyze their code and have all these technical discussions, and you're both very kind of versed in the same thing. But think about it. It's like, okay, well, if you don't play guitar, and you see someone playing like a Beatles song, you're like, oh my God, like that's amazing. This person's like playing music, and I can't even get my like fingers on the strings. And you're like, wow, it's amazing, And the same way that someone who doesn't know anything about computers is like, I need a website for my, my mortgage firm, and and I met this kid, and he's typing all these symbols, and he's like building this amazing website, and wow. But then after you meet more of these people, then you meet Jimi Hendrix, and you're like, okay, But you can't tell, or you can sort of tell, but like, the point is, by just having that one data point, there's nothing to extrapolate from that other than that, oh my God, this person knows so much about this area that I don't know anything about. And this is really important is a really important subject, because as a founder, you might be a good engineer, but you're not good at all this other stuff. And pretty much anybody who has made their background in some of their area, like or a business development person or a finance person, is going to know a whole lot more about that than you. And so one interesting thing we did is, we screwed it up a few times. We hired people that just didn't work out. It was a very painful experience. Two is probably all of our early business people for the first couple of years we hired as consultants, which is kind of strange. It's hard to play it the other way, so I don't know if it was a net good thing or a bad thing, but it worked well, so that we sort of got versed. We learned a lot in the process of kind of getting a brain dump from this person. And then we also would talk to large numbers of a lot of marketing people, or a lot of finance people, or a lot of business development people. And over time, you get more and more context as, okay, well, what's really important in this field? And who's the best person I've ever met on this stuff? And this is another area where if you get sort of the best possible investors that you can, then they'll have really great networks of talented people in all these different fields. And that's something where you can help lean on them to interview these candidates on your behalf. But that is actually one of the harder things about doing this is how do you judge people who you have no context for what they do?
What do you as a CEO focus on a daily basis?
So the question is, what as a CEO do I focus on a daily basis? And it's another hard question to answer, but it's sort of like, well, what is the highest leverage use of my time? Is one kind of framing. Okay, how can I think it's sort of going to. There's a very long answer to that question. It's really how do we make sure we're doing the core things really, really well, like making sure we're hiring really good people, making sure we're building a great product, and making sure our users are happy. And then there's a whole bunch of other things that you have to worry more or less about over time. And then there's a lot. Then you build a team around you, and then have to make sure that they're happy and effective, and all kind of rowing in the same direction. And then there's invariably fires that have to be put out, and so it's actually it's a surprisingly complicated question to answer because many days, especially when people make the transition from being an individual contributor to being a manager, so many days pass. You're like, oh my God, what did I even get done today? I was just like talking, and I was just like responding to email, and like.
Do you focus on culture?
It's a follow-up question. Do I focus on culture? Like, absolutely. Arash, my co-founder, is even more opinionated about this stuff. One of my weaknesses, well, sort of double-edged sword, is I tend to be optimistic in general, and so I'm always like optimistic about people. So I'm like, oh well, or give people the benefit of the doubt. And he's the other way around. So it's actually a good kind of counterbalance. Yeah.
So how you deal with the co-founder share, and why Steve Jobs picked your company other than your competitors?
Say the first part of the question again.
First question: how you deal with co-founder share?
Co-founders like
share percentage.
Oh, shares. Okay.
Yeah.
Dividing equity.
Second question is why Steve Jobs picked your company rather than your competitors?
So I'll answer both questions quickly. So how do you divide up equity with your co-founder? And again, it's a very nuanced subject. But people have written great things about that. And actually, it's one of those things where if you look it up on Quora or you search for things on Google, you get some very knowledgeable responses. And so I don't really have anything beyond that to add. And then beyond just sort of the basic things around, make sure it's subject to vesting, meaning that they get it over time, so that if you have some disastrous situation, you don't have to deal with that. And the second question was, why did Steve Jobs pick our company over competitors? I think any company that does something interesting on the way up, gets all kinds of conversations like that happen. And I think the started the conversation with a compliment that we had a great product, and which is high praise. I'll take it. And I presume I can't answer that on his behalf, but presumably they've clearly understood that this is something important. All right.
Drew, thanks a bunch. We've got a basis leader here.